Fidelity recently published a retirement healthcare estimate that shocked a lot of people. But the real problem isn't the number, it's what that number accidentally exposed. Because if your retirement plan assumes healthcare costs behave predictably, there's a good chance your plan is quietly broken, even if everything looks fine on paper. That's why in today's video, I want to show you the hidden flaw this reveals and why it's causing even well-prepared retirees to struggle. Let's get right into it. Most people who hear that Fidelity number don't panic, they nod, because they've planned, they've saved, they've worked with an advisor, and their projections already show that they should be fine. But this is where the unease starts, because even retirees with solid plans often feel like something still doesn't quite add up. Not because the math is wrong, but because retirement doesn't behave the way that the math assumes that it will. Healthcare is the clearest example of that disconnect. People get anxious because it's unpredictable. And when a retirement plan is built on predictability, even one variable that refuses to behave can quietly undermine everything else. That is why Fidelity's estimate matters, not as a headline, but as a warning sign of a deeper planning flaw. When Fidelity released its estimate that a couple retiring today may need roughly $172,000 to cover healthcare expenses in retirement, it grabbed attention for a reason. It's a big number, and it sounds alarming. Fidelity did a great job carefully researching this topic, and the information is directionally useful. And the real problem is how most people interpret it. Because when retirees hear that number, they tend to think in totals. How much do I need to save? Will my portfolio cover that? What gets missed here, though, is how that number is built. Fidelity's estimate is based on averages. It assumes relatively smooth increases in healthcare costs over time. It spreads expenses across decades of retirement, and it presents them as a predictable planning input you can use. And that's where the disconnect begins. Real retirement healthcare costs don't arrive smoothly. They come in waves. They vary dramatically from one household to the next, and they change based on health events, policy shifts, longevity, and timing, not neat annual planning assumptions. So while the total number gets headlines, the variability inside that number is what actually causes anxiety. A retirement plan built on an average healthcare estimate might look perfectly fine on paper, but it's still fragile in practice because it isn't designed to handle when and how those costs show up. That's why Fidelity's estimate isn't just a cost warning, it's a signal. It reveals a deeper flaw in how many retirement plans are built, treating healthcare like a predictable line item instead of a dynamic variable that needs flexibility around it. And once you see that, it becomes clear why healthcare so often becomes that pressure point that exposes the limits of static retirement planning. The hidden flaw Fidelity's estimate exposes isn't about healthcare specifically, but it's about how most retirement plans are built, right? Traditional plans are static by design. They rely on fixed assumptions, average returns, steady inflation, predictable spending, and clean annual adjustments that behave the same way year after year after year. And again, that structure works reasonably well when life is stable and income is consistent, but retirement doesn't operate that way, does it? In retirement, income sources shift, spending changes year to year, markets move in unpredictable sequences, healthcare costs arrive unevenly, and tax rules, premiums, and benefits evolve over time. Yet most plans treat all of this variability as if it can be smoothed out and averaged away. On paper, that creates confidence, but in real life, that creates fragility. Because when a plan is built on predictability, it doesn't fail all at once, it starts to fail quietly. A retiree may feel fine during strong market years, only to discover later that early withdrawals magnified losses that they didn't anticipate. Healthcare expenses may look manageable in the long-term projection, but a few high-cost years in the wrong order can force withdrawals that can ripple through the rest of your plan. Taxes may appear reasonable on average until required withdrawals or premiums spike unexpectedly, and it pushes income into a higher tax bracket at the worst possible time. Individually, none of these events feel catastrophic, but combined and compounded, they create stress, second-guessing, and uncertainty. This is why so many retirees with good plans will still feel uneasy once retirement begins, not because the plan was careless, but because it wasn't designed to adapt. Again, static plans assume stability. Retirement does not have that. It delivers variability. And when those two collide, healthcare concerns often become that pressure point that exposes the mismatch first, not because it's the largest expense, but because it's the least predictable. That is the real flaw that Fidelity's number reveals. Not the size of the estimate, but the planning assumptions sitting underneath it. This is where retirement planning stops being theoretical and starts to feel personal, because most retirees don't experience this flaw as a spreadsheet problem. They experience it as a feeling, a quiet uncertainty about whether their plan can really handle what lies ahead. Many retirees did everything that they were supposed to, right? They saved consistently, planned ahead, they made thoughtful decisions along the way. So when unease shows up, it gets confusing. They're not reckless spenders, they're not ignoring reality, but something still doesn't feel settled. And that discomfort usually isn't about how much things cost, it's about not knowing when or how costs will show up, and whether that plan can absorb them without forcing trade-offs. Healthcare intensifies this feeling because it sits at that intersection of money, health, and control. You can plan carefully for markets, you can adjust spending habits, and you can manage taxes deliberately. But healthcare doesn't always follow intention. And when a plan treats it as predictable, retirees are left carrying that uncertainty emotionally. That's why anxiety often rises in retirement, even when the numbers look okay. Not because retirees suddenly become irrational, but because they sense that their plan isn't equipped to respond dynamically when life deviates from the model or the plan. And when a plan can't explain what happens next if a condition changes, confidence quickly erodes. This is the moment many retirees start second-guessing decisions, delaying plans, or becoming overly cautious. Not because they lack resources, but because they lack clarity. And clarity is exactly what static plans fail to provide. So what should retirees do instead? The goal in retirement isn't to predict every outcome. It's to be prepared for change. That means shifting away from plans that try to lock in certainty and toward strategies that can create flexibility. Retirees who navigate this well don't eliminate risk. They just design around it. They focus on building a plan that can respond when those variables change, instead of just assuming that those variables will behave. Practically, that starts with clarity. Understanding how much income your lifestyle actually requires, how discretionary your spending really is, and which expenses are non-negotiable versus negotiable creates a foundation for better decisions. From there, the focus shifts to adaptability. Rather than relying on a single projection, a dynamic approach evaluates multiple paths, showing how markets, healthcare costs, taxes, and spending patterns interact over time. When conditions are favorable, the plan takes advantage of that. When conditions tighten, the plan adjusts early before the small pressures become major problems. This approach changes how retirees experience uncertainty. Instead of reacting emotionally when something unexpected happens, they know what levers exist and how adjustments affect the bigger picture. Healthcare costs don't just disappear, but they stop feeling like a looming unknown. Market volatility doesn't go away, but its impact is understood and managed. Taxes don't become simple, they just become coordinated with income decisions instead of just catching retirees off guard. What this ultimately provides isn't a perfect forecast, but a direction, a sense that no matter how retirement unfolds, there's a clear process for deciding what to do next. And that shift from prediction to preparation is what restores confidence when retirement stops behaving like the plan assumed that it would. And again, this is where clarity starts to replace guesswork. For many retirees, uncertainty persists because they don't have a clear reference point for what that retirement actually needs to support. And that's where portfolio income needs, or PIN, comes in. Portfolio income needs isn't just a calculation, it's a decision anchor. It represents the amount of reliable income required to support your lifestyle after accounting for essential expenses, discretionary spending, and the realities of how retirement actually unfolds. When retirees understand their PIN, decisions stop feeling abstract. Instead of asking, can I afford this? They ask, how does this decision affect my income needs and my ability to sustain them? Healthcare variability fits directly into this framework. Rather than guessing how a medical expense might impact a long-term projection, portfolio income needs helps retirees see how changes in healthcare spending affect their income that their plan has to produce, and where adjustments can be made without jeopardizing other things. This changes behavior. A retiree facing higher healthcare costs may decide to temporarily reduce discretionary spending instead of drawing more aggressively from investments. Another may shift income sources to cover a higher cost year without permanently increasing withdrawals. Others might time larger non-urgent healthcare expenses around tax-efficient income strategies so that the impact is absorbed more smoothly. Again, understanding your portfolio income needs doesn't eliminate trade-offs, but it makes them visible. And visibility is what restores confidence. Because instead of feeling like every decision could unknowingly break the plan, retirees understand which choices matter most and which adjustments are temporary and how today's decisions will ripple into the future. And that's what turns a retirement plan from a static document into a living guide, right? One that helps retirees navigate uncertainty without losing control. When flexibility begins to narrow. There's a reason this conversation matters most before retirement officially begins. Between roughly ages 55 and 64, retirees are in their most flexible planning phase. Income is still adjustable, tax strategies are fluid, and healthcare decisions still offer meaningful choices, and timing remains a lever, not a constraint. But once retirement fully begins, that flexibility starts to narrow. Medicare enrollment introduces fixed rules, Social Security decisions create long-term consequences, required minimum distributions eventually lock in taxable income, and healthcare costs become less optional and more reactive. At that point, planning doesn't stop, but the range of available moves shrinks. Decisions made earlier determine how much room there is later. A plan built before retirement has the opportunity to create buffers, build flexibility into income sources, and prepare for variability. A plan adjusted only after retirement begins might have fewer levers to pull. And this is why healthcare planning feels so different on either side of retirement. Understanding this shift isn't about rushing decisions, it's about recognizing when flexibility exists and using it intentionally. Because the most resilient retirement plans aren't the ones that predict the future perfectly, they're the ones that preserve options before the rules narrow them. Let's take a moment to talk about HSAs. Health savings accounts are often discussed as a niche benefit for a secondary planning tool. But in reality, they play a much larger role in retirement healthcare planning than many people realize. At its core, an HSA is designed specifically for healthcare expenses, and it comes with a unique set of tax advantages. Contributions go in pre-tax, growth is tax deferred, and qualified healthcare withdrawals are tax-free. That combination alone makes HSAs powerful. But what makes them especially valuable in retirement is how they interact with healthcare uncertainty. Unlike many retirement accounts, HSA funds can be used at any age for qualified medical expenses without triggering penalties or required distributions. They can cover premiums, out-of-pocket costs, prescriptions, and other healthcare-related expenses that inevitably arise over time. Because HSAs aren't subject to required minimum distributions, they give retirees another pool of assets that can be accessed strategically without forcing taxable income at inopportune times. That matters when healthcare costs spike. Instead of increasing withdrawals from a taxable or a tax-deferred account, retirees can use HSA funds to cover healthcare expenses directly, helping preserve other income sources and reducing pressure on the rest of your plan. HSAs also offer flexibility in timing. Qualified expenses can be reimbursed long after they occur, as long as proper records are kept. This allows retirees to decide when to take distributions, not just whether to take them. For retirees navigating unpredictable healthcare costs, that flexibility can make a meaningful difference, not because HSAs eliminate healthcare risk, but because they give retirees a dedicated tool built specifically to handle it more efficiently. And if this is making you think differently about how healthcare costs fit into your retirement plan, you're not alone. For many retirees, this uncertainty doesn't come from the size of the numbers. It comes from not knowing how those numbers interact with everything else. So if you'd like clarity on how healthcare expenses, income needs, and flexibility actually work together for your specific situation, there's a link below where you can request a personalized review of your retirement plan. It's not about replacing what you've done. It's about understanding where your plan is resilient and where you might need to adapt before those decisions are harder to change. Again, click on the link below and request your personalized review. Let's move on to the comprehensive healthcare planning framework, how it all actually works, right? A comprehensive healthcare plan in retirement isn't built around a single number or a one-time estimate. It's built around a process. The first step is stress testing healthcare costs inside the broader retirement plan, not in isolation. Instead of assuming one smooth path, your plan needs to look at multiple scenarios: years with average costs, years with elevated expenses, and years where healthcare becomes a dominant variable. This helps identify where pressure shows up first and how much flexibility exists before lifestyle adjustments are required. Next, healthcare costs should be coordinated with income sources. Rather than just increasing withdrawals automatically, your plan should evaluate where income should come from in those higher cost years: taxable accounts, tax-deferred accounts, or dedicated healthcare assets like an HSA. This prevents short-term healthcare needs from permanently increasing long-term withdrawals. From there, taxes are layered in. Higher healthcare spending often coincides with higher taxable income through distributions, premiums, or surcharges. A dynamic framework monitors those thresholds so income decisions don't unintentionally trigger higher tax brackets or additional costs. Timing plays a role as well. Some healthcare expenses can be anticipated, others can't. That plan should have checkpoints to reassess assumptions as health, coverage, and policy rules will evolve over time. And throughout the process, everything should be anchored back to your portfolio income needs. Healthcare planning doesn't exist on its own, and it needs to be evaluated through the lens of how much income that plan must reliably produce and how changes can affect your sustainability. When healthcare costs rise, the plan doesn't panic, it responds. Adjustments are made, trade-offs are visible, and decisions are intentional. That's the difference between planning for healthcare and planning around healthcare. One treats it as an expense, and the other treats it as a variable that has to be managed inside of a living retirement strategy. When Fidelity published its healthcare estimate, it wasn't trying to expose a flaw in retirement planning, but it did. Not because, again, the number was shocking, but because it highlighted how many plans are built on assumptions that don't hold up in retirement. Healthcare doesn't suddenly become expensive. It became unpredictable, and unpredictability is exactly where static plans struggle. Most retirement plans aren't fragile because they're poorly constructed. They're fragile because they're built to explain an average future, not navigating a changing one. And healthcare simply makes that weakness visible sooner. It arrives unevenly, it interacts with taxes, income, and timing, and it forces decisions at moments when flexibility matters the most. That's why so many retirees feel confident at first and then uncertain later, not because they planned incorrectly, but because their plan wasn't designed to adapt. So if you're within 5 years of retirement and you are ready to stop guessing and start understanding how your retirement plan actually holds up under real world conditions, click the link below where you can book a meeting with us to go over your situation and your concerns. Again, a good retirement plan is designed to help you see how healthcare costs, income needs, and flexibility interact in your situation and where your plan may need to adapt before those choices become harder to change. Because the goal isn't to have a perfect projection, it's to have a plan that can respond when retirement doesn't follow the script. So until next time, take care.